So I'm Julie. I'm an engineering with nature practice lead at the Army Corps. And I'm also work in the San Francisco district as the environmental branch chief. So I'm going to talk about this with my engineering with nature hat on, although they really overlap. So like Emily said, I think we all acknowledge the need for engineering guidance. A couple years ago, we did a poll to the whole Army Corps. So it's very Army Corps specific, trying to ask, does your district run into trouble implementing nature-based solutions? What are those issues? What type of guidance would be helpful? How would you like to see it? Because one of the number one things we hear is like, oh, well, there's no guidance. There's no guidance. There's no guidance. And as you all know, the Army Corps really likes its guidance. Like there's a lot of guidance. There's a lot of manuals. And nature-based solutions are mentioned in different ones. But it's, I think, part of the need we're all experiencing is like, we need the research, like Kayla's talking about, we need the pilot projects, we need to monitor them. We also then need to be able to roll that up so that other people can replicate it. So there was a series of polls, and I'll just point you to sort of some of the main things. Of course, quantification, performance, maintenance, cost, risks, things that the Army Corps likes to think about a lot. And then what format should the new guidance be delivered in? Engineering regulations. So I've had to learn a lot about like what those means and how those nest to try to figure out how to meet that need and say, okay, hey, you want it? Here it is. Let's use it. So like I said before, there's a lot of different places where you could update all these ERs and EMs that everybody uses. They're really important for making sure there's consistency and people, without some experience are able to access, the steps that they need. I'm not personally so familiar with how you update these, but a lot of people talk about how updating these is really, really hard. And so this consensus was about like, there's no USACE agency guidance for implementation of nature-based solutions. So let's try to meet that need. And then, of course, we want to update where we can, but like, let's not let that hold back the process. So lots of obstacles. It takes a long time. There's limited funding. There's government shutdowns. There's agency priorities. Also, as I see in the chat, and as we all know from working here, natural infrastructure, nature-based solutions require really site-specific guidance. So how do you write guidance for something that like you really need to know your landscape, your hydrology, everything that is very, very site-specific. However, there's so much going on, like we heard, new information is coming out. So how could, like, this seems doable. And I know there's a lot of other efforts going on. Emily's involved in some other ones. And it really ties into the RALS program that I think is one of the founding pieces of this collaborative. So several years ago, the EWN program out of ERDIC partnered with Jacobs Engineering and lots of other people to try to support the development of this. There were a number of like big collaborative moments. We're trying to get, USACE is 38,000 people, which is really insane. There's lots of divisions. Everyone feels ownership over everything. Nature-based solutions doesn't have like a center or a person at headquarters. And so how do you get the engineering and construction side, like with environmental side, with the, how do we bring everybody together so that everyone agrees that we can use this guidance? So there was a series of meetings to try to get like enough level set. In March 2024, we got out the first round of reports. There was kind of the review period. And I just want to point out, this was, groups of writers, groups of reviewers, including academics, private sector. I had to twist several people's arms. Marilyn and Jeremy are like on the list to be reviewers for some of the coastal ones when they start to come out. And, anyone else, if you're interested, let me know. Okay, so there's this big idea that the Army Corps has these engineering pamphlets, which are like overarching documents. And so that's being created. And there's like drafts of that for nature-based solutions. This has not existed before. Then there was this idea that, when you start to write engineering guidance, like how do you not write a geomorphology textbook and a planning textbook before you then zoom in to like the actual specifics that an engineer needs to follow? So we really wrestled with that. How do you not write like, so we have these drafts of like floodplain reconnection 101. And someday that will be part of this. So that's kind of the second line. And then the third line, which is what we're actively producing right now, are these tech reports or guidance documents for specific measures like a floodplain bench, wood toe protection, oyster reefs, and coastal wetlands, which are obviously massive topics. But the idea is those are individual measures that we could start to write these guidance documents for that would roll up to this engineering pamphlet. So that's kind of like the overarching goal here. So this is where we're at right now. On the Riverine side, very proud to have gotten to be part of the first tech report that came out on floodplain benching. Obviously, floodplain benching is not as new as some of our other topics that we're really more focused on in this collaborative, right? We've been doing floodplain benching as part of river restoration for a really, really long time. This was trying to put it into the framework of flood risk management, nature-based solutions, sort of for an Army Corps audience. And I'll put a link to that later, or it's later on in these slides. Wood-based wood toe protection is what we've been calling it, sort of wood-based riverbank stabilization or alternatives to riprap in rivers is the next one that's coming out of the gate, probably by early 26. On the coastal side, they're working on oyster reefs. Now, I know a major question is like, how do you do that for the East Coast, the Gulf Coast, the West Coast? So it's a real challenge trying to figure out how to make this applicable over an huge range of conditions, but still something that can be used by project engineers who are like, where do I start? How do I do this? So I'm not going to go through this. I have just like a few minutes, but I kind of wanted to show where we landed in terms of like what these guidance documents look like. Again, it can't be planning. It doesn't involve how do you decide which nature-based solution to use in this environment. That's assuming that has happened already. It is not a basics on tidal hydrology or on geomorphology, like I said. However, there's references. So there's a bit of a planning section, site characterization. What data do you need to collect in the field from the desktop? How do you determine your design objectives? What's your risk tolerance? The idea here was how do we inject nature-based solutions into a non-restoration project, a flood, where you're just thinking about flood risk management. How do you get a nature-based solution to accomplish multiple benefits? Then there's the meat of it, I would say, is this project design and evaluation section, which is this iterative process of design and then kind of evaluation and more design. And then additional considerations, like people, all the other things that are really important, environmental permits, monitoring, like all the things that like we think about so much. Again, like this is not trying to be everything for everyone. It's trying to be like when you're the project engineer on a project, how do you do this if you've never designed a floodplain bench before? And then how does it relate to other use-case guidance? Like you saw on my first slide, there's like so much guidance. So that's kind of the format that the floodplain benching document follows and that the rest of these technical reports are following. So what's coming next after those four that I talked about earlier, beaver dam analogs, leaky dams, these features that are being used really, really often in parts of Intermountain West, parts of California, bioengineered stream bank stabilizations, or more options than just wood toe protection, remeandering. There's a whole range, right, of floodplain reconnection from like how do you stop a bank from eroding to how can you give the river more room? And so it's trying to meet that sort of spectrum of ideally giving the river more space, and how do you engineer for that? Sometimes you can't, and so what can you do instead of riprap? On the coastal side, cobble gravel beaches, which like is really important for connection to the RALS program, since that's the RALS effort is also developing that specifically for San Francisco Bay, dynamic revetments, other hybrid approaches. So this is all kind of, I would say, evolving. This is where I think, this is where they're going to be held. I don't know if I can put this one in the chat. Thanks for linking the actual guidance that's out, but this sort of sets the framework for what this effort is trying to achieve. There's a lot of case studies and other related literature aside from the actual guidance document. And again, this is a first try for the Army Corps. So I feel like that is really great. Very long overdue, so good. Let's keep it going. It definitely needs to evolve and has to relate to the local efforts that are going on here, other efforts at, for SAME or other engineering groups. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure that this group knew about it, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.